Did you know there's an unwritten rule in the South where you can say anything you want about someone as long as you qualify it with the statement, bless his heart or bless her heart. So you can be rude, you can be condescending, you can insult someone as long as you say, bless his heart or bless her heart. Well, my brother, bless his heart, has many habits I find annoying. And one of them is when he goes to buy a book, he will go to the store or the bookstore, take it off the shelf, and read the ending first. And I'm like, why are you even buying the book if you're going to read the ending first? And he says, well, if I don't like the ending, I don't want to buy the book. Well, today we are going to look at a passage and we're going to read the ending first. And at first or second look, it's kind of hard. It's kind of a heavy passage. It's kind of hard to like. So we're going to go to Colossians 1. And we're going to read the ending first, and we're going to start in verse 21. So Colossians 1:21. And although you were formerly alienated and hostile in mind, engaged in evil deeds, yet he has now reconciled you in his fleshly body through death, in order to present you before him holy and blameless and beyond reproach. If indeed you continue in the faith firmly established and steadfast, and not moved away from the hope of the gospel that you have heard, which was proclaimed in all creation under heaven. And when we read that, we begin pretty well, don't we? We read this about Jesus doing this, Jesus making us awesome, and Jesus making us holy. But then we get to the middle and we kind of hit a pothole. We kind of lurch a little bit because we see that there's this I have to do something. And what we tend to do when we read this passage, or passages like this in Scripture, is we tend to read them like this. If indeed you continue, then you'll be holy and blameless. And that's a burden many of us feel when we read these types of passages. We seem to have this conversation in our head of, okay, Jesus has made me holy, and that's good, and that's great, I love that, but now I have to be good enough to prove that I'm holy. If I continue, if I put in enough effort, if I am good enough, then I'm okay with God. And then God likes me. Well, that's not an ending that I like. And I'm not sure I want to read that book. Thankfully, that's absolutely the incorrect ending. Unfortunately, it's an ending that many of us were raised with. We were raised with this mentality of, well, Christians don't do this. Christians don't act like that. You know, if you're going to be a good Christian, then you got to look like this, you got to walk like this, you got to dress like this. And that's not an ending I like. So we're going to hold off on the ending, and I'm going to tell you about when I started to study Colossians. I was studying this book, and I felt like there was this thread, this trend of holiness throughout the whole book. And it didn't really jump out at the reader, but I looked up some guys that are actually smart and educated, and they agreed with me. There was this thread of holiness going throughout the whole book of Colossians. And I thought to myself at the time, of all the subjects that I am unqualified to teach about, it's holiness. I am so unholy. I am so stained. I have walked through the blood of Christ countless times. How can I ever teach anyone about holiness? So, not a comfortable subject for me today, guys. But I find it incredible how often God is doing that to us. He likes to stretch us. He likes to mold us. He likes to reshape us into His image, and that's not often comfortable. So here I am teaching about a subject that I am completely unable to teach. So I hope God knows what He's doing today. And when we read about holiness in the Bible, we read about it in two general senses. And the first sense is a sense that we're all pretty comfortable with. Holiness basically means to be special, be separate. And you can do that with anything. You can take a vehicle or some money or whatever, and you can dedicate it to the kingdom work, and that becomes holy, which we're okay with that. We're okay with saying, well, this money's set aside for God's work. And that money technically becomes holy. But the other use that we see of holiness in the Scriptures when we talk about the character and the person of God. And that's where we get into the real definition of holiness, where we talk about different, sacred, completely other. And we're all comfortable with applying that definition to God, aren't we? Because He is different than us. He is special. One Bible dictionary said it like this: a person does not define God. In the same way, the idea of holiness is at once understandable yet elusive. Nevertheless, there is no other term equal to the fullness inherent in the word holiness. All of heaven's host, Israel, and the church ascribe praise to a holy God because that idea sets Him apart from everything else. Holiness is what God is. So it's natural for us to apply that to the Lord, isn't it? But when we talk about humanity, when we look in the mirror, it's not so natural, is it? It's not very often that I go up to somebody and say, "Hi, Claudia, I'm Jason, I'm holy." You know, I'm pretty sure that most of you won't do that. At least, and it's natural because we tend to understand that we are familiar, we are normal, we are common, and we tend to understand that God is not normal, God is not common, and God is not familiar. He is holy. And all of humanity understands this. There's not a single world religion that doesn't understand that God is separate from us. And all religions, most religions that I know of, teach that we have to become holy to know a holy God. And where the difference is in how we attain that holiness. How do we become holy? And when I think of people and holiness, I think of priests and nuns and monks and hermits, in their monasteries and in their nunneries and in their caves. I think of those Tibetan monks in their orange robes sitting under a waterfall, meditating and not eating for 14 days or whatever they do. And that's the kind of thing when I think about humanity and holiness, I tend to think about these people that separate themselves from the world and they deny themselves food, or they deny themselves pleasures. And when I think about holiness, when I ascribe it to myself, though, I go through this checklist in my head of do's and don'ts. If I do this, then I'll be holy. If I don't do this, then I'll be holy. And I go through this list, and if I do these things, or if I don't do these things, then God is going to like me. Then God will take me, because I'll clean myself up a little bit, Well, I'm here to tell you that we in ourselves cannot be holy. You cannot deprive yourself of enough. You cannot live far enough away. You cannot be good enough to know a holy God. That list, that being good, that some of us were raised, if you want to know God, you got to be good. We were taught that. I've walked that road. That road only ends in despair and death. Life in the Lord lies not in being good, but in trusting a God who does the impossible. We have a God who did the impossible so we could know Him. Paul talks to us about this impossible God in Colossians, and we're going to go to verse 12 now. Colossians 1, verse 12. It says this: "Giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light." So in other words, we were unqualified. We had nothing in us that could make us qualified to be the child of God that you are. There's nothing in us that can make us qualified to know a holy God. God's love for us alone is all that is required to make us His children. We cannot qualify ourselves. We cannot be good enough to earn our way to knowing God. It is impossible. Praise God, we serve an impossible God. And He's been pounding this into me for I don't know how long, that He is impossible. What He does is impossible. He takes us and He transforms us. How is that possible? How can... Okay, totally off my notes. I was called to work at Calvary Christian Academy, and it's not comfortable. When I wasn't serving God, I hated kids, to be honest. I didn't want to be around them. They required far too much patience. I saw myself in them when I was their age, and nobody wanted to be around me. And now, Jesus Christ has transformed my heart, even though sometimes I'm still impatient. But young people I am called to serve young people, and I love it. I love it. Nothing gives me more joy than hearing kids laugh. Or cry in church. I love hearing kids cry in church because it means we're alive. I see people get embarrassed about it. My goodness, no. Let the world know that we're alive. We're a living, breathing church with real people in it. I love it. And this impossibility of God is shown in everything. And, there's that passage, well, there's two passages, but we all know the phrase, right, that with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible, right? And not only has he done this impossibility to make us qualified to know him, he has rescued us. If you continue reading in verses 13 and 14, for he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And when I think of this, I picture one of those TV shows or movies where there's this helicopter rescue going out into the ocean. And there's this person that's been floating out there for who knows how long, and they're surrounded by waves, and the storm is coming in, and the night is falling, and the time is running out. And the rescue crew is frantically searching for this person. And the person just sees wave after wave after wave of despair crashing around them. And they know they have no hope. And then impossibly, this ladder from this helicopter shows up, and they desperately grab that. And they're carried away, they're rescued from certain doom into new life on the shore. God does the same thing with each one of us. He came and found us. He came and sought us out when we were in rebellion and fear and darkness, and he rescued us. He lifts us out of the gloom, and he takes us home to a new life in Jesus. And Paul goes on to make it very, very clear that everything is about Jesus. Verse 15, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him, in Jesus, all things hold together. When Jesus was talking to his disciples in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, he said this. He said, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him. And Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us. And Jesus said, have I been so long with you, Philip, and have not yet come to know me? Have I been with you so long, Claudia? Have I been with you so long, Bob? Have I been with you so long? Insert your name. He impossibly wants to know us. And Jesus says, he who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? Can you imagine Philip's face after this conversation? He had to ask himself, how can the being who created the heavens be this Jesus in front of me? How can the maker of the stars be here with me in the dust? How can the architect of the human body be in the human body? I mean, Jesus just washed the dust of our earth off his feet when he's having this prior to having this conversation with Philip. I cannot imagine how Philip felt. But I guess we all can. Because our God can do the impossible. Somehow our God put on skin and walked down here with us. Jesus showed us God's desire to know us, to impossibly know us, by living here with the liars and the thieves and the murderers like me. God came here to know you, and so you could know him. And it is not possible. He chose to reveal himself to us because he wants to know us desperately. This Jesus, the preeminent Jesus, the first place Jesus, this uncreated creator named Jesus, our supreme King, worthy of our trust, bigger than our fears, bigger than our sicknesses, bigger than our governments, bigger than our cancers, bigger than anything, bigger than our greatest enemy, our King. There is not one square centimeter of this universe that Jesus cannot look at and say, that belongs to me, and he starts with us. He looks in the mirror at you and he says, you belong to me. So huge. Makes stars we can't even imagine. And he's so small. Impossibly small. So humble that he's small enough to come down here and experience this place of darkness and fear. So small that he wants to know what we feel and what we experience. Small enough to see our tears and small enough to weep with us. Our King, our impossible King. Do you know him? Do you know my King? Our King, he wants to know us so desperately that impossibly, that word just doesn't stop coming up. He makes us one together through Jesus Christ. And I don't know how, but you and me are family. We are connected by blood stronger than ties of genetics. We are connected by the blood of a king. And in verse 18, he talks about making us all one through the one named Jesus. He is also head of the body, the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Through him, I say, whether things on earth or things in heaven. And although you were formerly alienated and hostile in mind, engaged in evil deeds, yet he has now reconciled you. Thank you, Jesus. He has now reconciled you in his fleshly body through death, in order to present you before him holy and blameless and beyond reproach. And that phrase in verse 19, that phrase, all the fullness, means exactly that. There is nothing that's more real than Jesus Christ. Everything is in him, by him, of him, and through him. There is nothing outside of Jesus. Let me say that again. There is nothing outside of Jesus. And people can tell me, well, sure there is. There's lust, there's fear, there's lies, there's evil. And that's all outside of Jesus, right? And my answer to that is none of that will compare to the reality of Jesus Christ. None of it. There is nothing here. There is no health, there is no wealth more real than Jesus. There's no desire, there's no want, there's no need more real than Jesus. And the fullness we have in him is exactly that, full. All completeness lies in him. No matter what we face here, no matter what we lose here, no matter what happens here, all fullness is in Jesus Christ alone. And somehow, that includes us. Hebrews 12. See to, just making sure the Bible's there, not doing anything else. In Hebrews 12, the author of Hebrews tells us about the first covenant with Moses, and he talks about the people coming to the mountain, and the mountain is on fire, and the earth shakes, and they hear a voice so terrible and so frightening, the voice of God, and they beg to never hear the voice of God again. I can't imagine that. And he compares this first encounter with God to the second encounter with God, which is Jesus. And in verse 25, he says, "See to it that you do not refuse him," in this case is Jesus, "do not refuse Jesus who is speaking. For if those did not escape when they refused Moses, who warned them on earth, much less will we escape who turn away from Jesus who warns us from heaven. And his voice shook the earth then at Mount Sinai, but now he has promised, saying, Yet once more I will shake, not only the earth, but also the heaven." This expression, "yet once more," denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken, referring to created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude, by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. That last part, I used to think was a bad thing. But now I pray to be consumed. And it's terrifying prayer still. I'm terrified when I pray it. But, to have just God left and no Jason anymore. Only then will I truly be free. Only then will I actually be Jason. So anyway, don't be afraid to pray for God to consume you. Well, righteous fear. And when Jesus comes back, that passage tells us is that we will not be shaken. The whole universe is going to be sifted like flour, and it's going to be gone, except for this kingdom that we impossibly find ourselves in, this kingdom founded by the King Jesus Christ, and nothing will remain except the fullness found in him. Whew. Now I feel like I should let us all catch a breath. Should have a bad joke about here. So we started out tonight, or this morning, talking about how holy God is, right? And how we need to be holy to know him, because he's holy. And we talked about God qualifying us, and God rescuing us. We talked about the awesomeness of Jesus, and we talked about the fullness found only in Jesus. And now we reach the answer to the question we started with. How do we know a completely holy God? How do we, dirty, evil, selfish we, at least me, I don't know about you guys. Y'all might be, holy, but not me. How do we attain this holiness? And the answer is impossible. The answer is a place called Calvary. The answer is wood and nails and blood and darkness. The answer is an only Son, alone, on a hill called the Skull. The impossible answer is, my God, why have you forsaken me? The answer of our holiness lies only in the cross. Let's read verse 22 again. He has now reconciled you. Hey, there's nothing you can do about it. He has reconciled you. You haven't reconciled yourself. He has now reconciled you in his fleshly body through death, in order to present you before him holy and blameless and beyond reproach. He has taken us out of the kingdom of darkness and moved us to the kingdom of light. And he has said, I love the way Mike put it in that passage last week, he's put his name and his address on us because he owns us. He has done it. He has seen us in our darkness and our selfishness and our blood, and he has said to us, live. Live. He has done it. Jesus can now say to God, say, Dad, hey, Dad, this is Bruce. He's holy. This is Mike. He's blameless. Dad, I want you to meet Brenda. She's beyond reproach. And we still feel uncomfortable being called these things, don't we? But I'm telling you that Jesus' word is more powerful than yours. And Jesus' promises are more powerful than your sin. Jesus' grace is bigger than your works. And he has declared you holy, not you. He, and he alone, has said, this child is mine. And there will be times, if you're anything like me, a large amount of your time, where you don't feel that to be true. Where you feel that Jesus is not, surely wasn't talking about me. Did he just see what I did? How can I be holy? I just spit in his face for the 5 millionth time. How can I be blameless? And we don't feel this way. But I want to make this very, very clear. Our feelings and our emotions have nothing to do with our holiness. And I'm totally okay with being emotional. And sometimes that's a challenge when I'm feeling bad. But the reality is my feelings have nothing to do with holiness. Jesus' work on the cross is the only thing that has to do with our holiness. So let me ask you 2 questions. And the first one is this. Were you holy before you trusted Jesus Christ? No? Were you cleaned up before you decided to trust Jesus? You know, we all want to get cleaned up so God can accept us, right? No, we were in death and darkness and blood and filth. And how did Jesus feel about us then? Romans 5:8, right? A lot of us are having this go through our head. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So, second question. That love that God had for you when you were a sinner, when you were in your sin, did that change after he saved you? Did the love of God lessen when we became united with Jesus Christ? Did all of a sudden, did his love change from, you're in your rebellion against me and I love you too? Oh, well, now you're in with Jesus? Well, now you got to do this so that I can love you. Did that happen? No. No, it did not. So where does that leave us? That leaves us resting in the holiness of Jesus Christ. That leaves us irrefutably holy. Irrefutably holy because of nothing that we do, but because of everything that he has done. And you may ask, what about me? Surely we have a part in all this, right? Well, when we started this message, we started at the end, right? And we felt like our part, sometimes we read these passages and we feel like our part is pretty big. And my prayer for us tonight is that we all leave believing we are who Jesus says we are. Jesus says we are holy and blameless because of him. So our part in that is to trust him. And trust naturally grows into love, and love naturally results in change. How many of you have ever loved somebody and never changed? Right? It's a natural part of love. And when we trust Jesus and we trust him that he is who he says he is and we are who he says we are, that trust results in love and love results in change. And change is sometimes difficult. And I was trying to think of an example in our marriage where I had given up something for my wife. She's done most of the giving up, so it was kind of hard. But I came up with an example of I snore horribly bad, and Sue and I, Bob laughs, and Sue and I, Well, and Sue kicks, so it's not just me, okay? And we spent the first 17 years of our marriage sleeping in separate areas. I got the couch, of course. And Sue really wanted us to be able to stay in the same room at night with good reason. That's normally what married people do, right? And so we went and invested in the most painful procedure this side of Hades to get me to stop snoring, which was removing my tonsils, my adenoids, my little thing at the back, uvula, the thing back there, and taking metal instruments and scraping the inside of my throat so that it would scab up and hopefully be stiff enough for me to stop snoring. Of course, this was, free. They didn't charge me a thing. No, this was extremely expensive, and Caitlin, my daughter, she was 3 or 4 at the time, and she did hers at the same time. And she was up and bouncing around in 2 or 3 days, and there I am back in the bedroom, bring me food, ringing a bell that my wife never answered. This is how bad I hurt. I could only eat melted cheese sandwiches, cold. They tell you eat ice cream or whatever after this. Cold killed me. It was agonizing. So for 2 weeks, all I had was melted cheese sandwiches. And I love cheese, but man, that was a lot. And the best part is this. It didn't work. Yeah. All of that work and money and everything, and it didn't work. So we were pretty disappointed. But I still want to love her in this way. So I'm still keeping my ears open, looking at snoring things and looking at reviews and all that stuff on what works. And my dentist said, hey, I have this mouthpiece thing. I'll guarantee it'll stop you snoring. And I went ahead and got it last summer. And it wasn't cheap either, but it works. It's not comfortable. I wake up in the morning and I have to chew gum every morning to reset my jaw. But it works, and we can stay in one room. And so wasn't a pleasant process, but I love my wife. And I changed. I found a way to change, And that's the same thing we experience with God, where we love Him. We want to naturally love Him back, because our entire Christian life is a love response to God loving us first. But sometimes, obviously, there's struggle when we change. So if I could leave you with this final word, it's this. And you are holy. You are blameless. And you are beyond reproach, because Jesus Christ says you are. And He did the work to make you that way. He rescued you. If you leave here with nothing else today, leave here with that your holiness depends wholly and completely on Him.